Glad you're here.
Thank you.
I was out last week, out of town. Andrew had to fly solo with Dale and home being sick, so we're all back in full force tonight. And glad you're here. One time, many years ago, I was pretty young many years ago. And I was very new in my career, and I got selected to go make a presentation. And I didn't know really who I was making a presentation to, but it turns out I was making a presentation about training in our particular field to the head of training of the FAA. When I found that out, I was a little uncomfortable, you know. When one of our elders comes to our class, or one of the preachers, and I'm teaching, I'm not very comfortable. And so today my cardiologist has come to class, and he's a smart man, he's smarter than me, and I'm a little uncomfortable. However, if I get really uncomfortable and my heart acts up, then we can work on that. We actually had a little conversation yesterday about this subject, so hopefully we'll be able to convey a little bit of information to you tonight. We're glad you're here. Thanks for being here. Let's have a prayer. Father, we're thankful that we can be here tonight. We're thankful that we have science and we have medicine. And we're thankful that we have your inspired word and we have faith. Help us, Father, always to strive to increase our faith. Help us, Father, to look to you for guidance in all that we do. In Jesus' name, amen. You can see the title of this particular chapter in the book that we're using. It's a little silly. From the goo to you via the zoo. Now, if you break that down, you can kind of figure out what that's talking about. The goo, one cell animal of some kind that we all came from. But of course, before it got to us, it had to go through all the animal kingdom and so on and so forth. A little quick review of what Andrew said last week. It's probably all wrong since I wasn't here to hear what he said. Life does not consist of chemicals. If it did, then we could take chemicals, throw them into a test tube, and create life. Doesn't happen that way. I'm sure that he told you that there is no known natural law for specified complexity. Specified complexity. Do you remember? I don't know if Andrew used these stories, but did you use the alphabets? Mm-hmm. Okay. The kid comes down. Who ate alphabets when you were a kid? We did at my house. The kid comes down, he's going to get his cereal out, and mom has spelled out, take out the garbage. There has to be intelligence behind that. It's not like the wind blew the box over and the letters fell out and spelled out, take out the garbage. Okay? There is no natural law that can create specified complexity. A lot of these terms that are in this book that are not terms that I use in everyday use, and so try to illustrate and know what we're talking about. Another example, Mount Rushmore. Do we believe that the Grand Canyon was probably created by rivers running through there and erosion and so on? Yes. Do we believe that Mount Rushmore could have been created in the same way? There's not natural law that would do that. There has to be intelligence behind that. The simplest life form, the single cell, contains enough information equivalent to 1,000 complete sets of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Now, when I was a kid, my mom bought, probably from some door-to-door salesman, the Encyclopedia Britannica. And it even came with a little wooden case. It was in the living room. And I don't know how many volumes there were, probably 26, A through Z. And then on top, in a slot, there was a great big world atlas. I loved looking at those books. I didn't read them much, I just looked at them. There's a lot of pictures in there. 1,000 sets, that amount of information contained in a single cell. The simplest form of life contains that much information. No natural law could ever create that. Science is a search for causes, and there's only two types of causes: natural cause, intelligent cause. Darwinists or evolutionists, they look at those 1,000 encyclopedias, that is the amount of information contained in a single cell, and say that natural law caused that. But take out the garbage required intelligence. It required somebody to get all those letters out and line them up. You can't have it both ways. It's either an intelligent cause or it's not. Probably one of the last things that Andrew told you last week, spontaneous generation of life has never been observed. For evolution to happen, you have to have spontaneous generation of life. And the funny thing about it is, a Darwinist will look at a theist, that's you and I that believe in God, and say, oh, you only base what you believe on faith. The Darwinist has to have faith to believe that that single cell could be created without spontaneous generation. All right, tonight we're going to talk about, and here I go again. You know, I told you last time was the first time I'd ever done this. I'm already 3 slides behind. All right? So here we go. Okay. Tonight we're going to talk about this. There's only 2 possibilities. Either God created us, or man created God. Man dreamed God up. All right, 2 possibilities. Either God really exists, or he is a creation of mankind's mind. Well, Darwinism, as a theory, is a creation of the human mind. We can even go right back to the person that put his name on it. To believe Darwinism, you have to believe a number of things. You have to believe concerning the origin of the universe that something arose out of nothing. Concerning the design of the universe, that order came from chaos. I was about in the 5th or 6th grade in art class, and as 5th or 6th graders are prone to do, we were making a lot of noise and so on, and the art teacher very loudly got us to be quiet and said she wasn't going to take it anymore. She was tired of the chaos. So we went back to whatever our coloring or painting or whatever it was, but one very creative young man who actually went on to become a very successful artist took some blue color of some kind and all over the page like this and titled it Chaos and turned it in. That didn't go well. To understand, or rather to believe Darwinism concerning the design of the universe, you have to believe that order came from chaos. You have to believe that life arose from non-life, and that intelligence came from non-intelligence. You have to believe that new life forms could come from existing life forms despite any evidence to the contrary. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit tonight. All right. There was a movie, 1985. Okay. Jodie Foster, if you can recognize her on there, called Contact. Anybody see the movie? Okay, I've not. Anybody read the book? It's based on a novel by Carl Sagan. Okay. So just a little bit about that. Science fiction. It deals with the theme of contact between humanity and a more technologically advanced extraterrestrial life form. This movie was based on that novel. There's a scientist in the movie, played by Jodie Foster. She's listening to radio waves out there in space, and she believes that she has found intelligent extraterrestrial life because they are broadcasting a set of numbers, prime numbers. Go way back in your math class. 1, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, I guess, and so on. And so that's what's being broadcast. And she determines that that is the universal language, numbers, and therefore there must be intelligent life. Only intelligent beings can create messages. Natural laws don't do that. Sagan wrote the book that the movie came from. He believes, or he believed, that it required an intelligent being to come up with this simple string of numbers, 1, 3, 5, 7, 11, etc. Okay? However, he did not believe that it took an intelligent being as represented by those 1,000 sets of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Now I'll just ask you this, does that make any sense at all? It took an intelligent being, an extraterrestrial, to be able to broadcast a set of numbers. But the amount of information found in a cell didn't require an intelligent being. Sagan wrote this. He said the human brain contained the equivalent of 20 million books. You ever heard that one? 20 million books. I don't have any way to justify that. I don't know. But that's what Sagan said. He says that the human brain is drastically more complex and specific than that string of prime numbers that he based his novel on, and yet he absolutely would not recognize intelligent creation. Where did the first life come from? For the Darwinist, that's the big question. It's a long, long way from a non-living chemical to a living cell. It's a whole lot further from a non-living chemical to you and I, to our brains. That's the big question for the Darwinists. They don't have an explanation for the source of the non-living chemical. If they can't come up with that, then how can they explain life? Well, here we go, we're behind again. They don't have an explanation. How do they explain life? It's something called macroevolution. Who's heard that term before? Macroevolution. This is all kind of new to me. Macroevolution versus microevolution. But macroevolution is where we get this phrase from the goo to you via the zoo. It is the belief that all life forms have descended from a common ancestor. So, sometime there was a one-celled creature, and here we are today. We all descended from that one-celled creature. This all happened by natural processes. There was no intelligent intervention, no God. We just happened. It took a long time, but that's what a Darwinist believes. When scientists look at bacteria in the laboratory, it changes. But if it lives, it still is bacteria. They don't change into something else. If they did, that would be macroevolution. Natural selection has never been known to create a new type. If it's bacteria to begin with, it's going to be bacteria. The Darwinist says that any observable change in any organism proves that life has evolved from the common ancestor, the first one-celled creature. Well, natural selection cannot produce a new species, new organs, or any changes, actually, major or minor. And there's 5 reasons that we can look to say that natural selection doesn't do that. Okay, time to play catch up again, isn't it? Here we go. 5 reasons. The first one is genetic limits. Genetic limits. Darwinists say that microevolution within a type proves macroevolution. Microevolution, a small change of some kind. Do we adapt? Do animals adapt to their changing environment? Yes, and there are changes. The Darwinists would say because man and animal adapt, then that proves that not only do we adapt in the short term, but we can adapt in the long term. Here's an example. Believing that life happens in this way, happens by chance, our authors threw this example out there, is like believing a 747 exists because a tornado went through a junkyard and threw all the pieces together. Think about a dog. How many of you have a dog? Okay. Tyler, what kind of dog do you have?
I have 2 dogs. An Irish Setter is one of them. So
Okay. Irish Setter. Somebody over here who's got a dog? Anybody? Nobody? This side of the room doesn't have dogs? What do you have?
We've got it's a German Shepherd mix, and then we've got a Chihuahua mix.
Ah, Chihuahua and a German Shepherd mix.
Well, 2 different dogs. Chihuahua Terrier.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Little dog, big dog. That's what I was trying to get to. Little dog, big dog. All right. What kind of dog do we have? A dachshund? No, not now.
Oh, we've had a dog.
We've had a dachshund. Okay. We had a dachshund. Now we have a golden doodle. Audrey had a black lab, but was really a Rottweiler. That's a whole other story.
Stick around.
A dog is a dog and is always going to be a dog. And no matter what scientists or dog breeders try to do, if you took your Chihuahua and your whatever else you said you had, German Shepherd,
Yeah.
they're still going to be dogs, no matter what you try to do as far as breeding dogs. Dogs will be dogs. Why? Because there are genetic limits. Scientists sometimes manipulate creatures. You probably remember in school studying about fruit flies. If you ever took anything that had to do with genetics, you studied about fruit flies. Do an awful lot with that. Why do we do fruit flies? Their lifespan is so short, we can see a whole bunch of generations. Okay. But the fact of the matter is, when those kinds of experiments are done and they are intelligently manipulating those creatures, macro evolution will never work. We'll never get a fruit fly to turn out to be a bumblebee. Doesn't work that way. If intelligent scientists can't break genetic barriers, then why would we believe that non-intelligent natural selection can do that? That is, non-intelligent natural selection, a one-cell organism turns into a man over, I suppose, what Sagan would say, billions and billions of years. Okay. Genetic limits. The next one is cyclical change. Cyclical change. The changes that do occur within a species are cyclical. And here's a really good example. Apparently Darwin worked with finches. I don't know why.
Galapagos.
Okay,
The Galapagos Islands.
there you go. You just never know what that might have evolved into.
I could have observed
That poor cricket. Darwin worked with finches, and you know what he observed? Depending upon long-term weather conditions, their beaks changed. When it was dry, when they were in a period of drought, the finches' beaks got bigger. Why? Because the seeds that they wanted to eat were harder and larger, and they needed a bigger beak to be able to crack those. During times of good precipitation, they didn't need a large beak, and the finches' beaks were smaller because the seeds they were going to eat were softer and smaller. What I'm trying to say with cyclical change, there was a change in that species that he observed. However, there was no new life form that was brought into existence, which would be macroevolution. No, it was microevolution, that is, their beaks changed from small to big and back to small and so on, depending upon the weather. This is my favorite, irreducible complexity. Okay? Irreducible complexity. I'm going to give you a definition. An irreducibly complex system is composed of several well-matched intersecting parts that contribute to the basic function, wherein the removal of any one of those parts causes the system to effectively cease functioning. Now, this is a definition from a guy named Michael Behe. Is that close, guys, do you think?
Behe.
Behe, Behe. We might just call him Michael. Different parts that have to be there, and they have to be working properly, and they have to be working together properly for the overall system to work. First example, a car engine. My best friend in high school, not because he had a car, he was my best friend, but he did have a car, and so he would give me rides home after ball practice and stuff. And one night, we were, our senior year, and it was in the spring, and it was close to the end of school, and we had gone to a local restaurant to hang out with a bunch of other kids, and he got tired and went home. That's my ride. And that's John, our other friend's ride. We got a little unhappy with him, so the next time we were around his car, we pulled a couple of spark plug wires off. And when I think about a complex system that has to have everything working together, boy, Dale's car, it ran rough. It really, and he doesn't know what's wrong with it, and his dad didn't know what was wrong with it, and the thing ran on propane, and his dad said, "You put gasoline in it?" "No, I didn't," and back and forth and back and forth, and we thought it was funny until one day he was pulling out onto 23rd Street, and that car wouldn't go, and there were cars coming from both sides, and I thought I was going to die. But when I think about a car's engine that has to have everything working properly, and think about that car where a couple of the spark plugs, 2 of the 8 weren't working, and that car would barely go. Well, let's look at something a little more scientific. In our bodies, for our blood to clot, there are a number of different facets to that operation that have to work properly. And if they don't, what happens when we cut ourselves? Our vision is the same way. Our cells, for them to be able to move in our bodies, if all of the parts aren't working properly, that's not going to happen. Everything I just mentioned, these are all complex systems of some kind. Darwin said everything comes from that single cell, and it's all going to evolve all the way to this very complex system with moving parts that have to interact. It couldn't have happened that way. Why? Because every step between here and here, that system would not have worked. And we're going to come back to that thought in just a little bit. What would happen is it would be non-functioning because all of those parts wouldn't be working together. The genetic alphabet, I think this is covered probably last week, I'm not sure. The genetic alphabet is made up of 4 letters. 4 letters, all right? Our alphabet is obviously 26 letters. Our genetic alphabet, 4 letters. Within every human cell, there are about, I don't even know in the book, guys, if this was a misprint. It says 3,000 million pairs of those letters. That's an awfully big number. But let's just say that there's a whole bunch of pairs of those genetic letters paired together. How many cells in our bodies, Doc? Trillions? Can I say trillions? Trillions. We have trillions of cells. And each one has that genetic code every one of those cells is irreducibly complex and contains irreducibly complex subsystems. Irreducible complexity means that new life cannot come into existence by slight successive changes over a long period of time. Okay? So, the example in our book is a mousetrap. I don't know how many of you ever looked at a mousetrap. Apparently there are 5 parts to a standard mousetrap. Okay? Well, think about it. If you've got a mouse and you want to take care of the mouse, and you go and get the mousetrap and you do everything you need to do, you've got to use it correctly and set it properly and so on. And all of those parts, the spring and so on, everything has to be working correctly to effectively take care of your mouse problem. So there's this evolutionist named Ken Miller, and he's going to disprove the idea about irreducible complexity that has to do with the mousetrap by designing a different mousetrap. It only had 4 parts. Okay, good idea. What did he leave out? The fact that he designed a new mousetrap with only 4 parts required intelligence. Okay. The mousetrap requires intelligence to build. Oh my, we're gonna have to leave some stuff out. Okay, let's move on. Non-viability of transitional forms. This is that idea of you've got to have all the parts working together from the single cell until you get all the way over here. But all the way in between, if we're in a process of change, there's your non-viability. The transitional form wouldn't be able to survive. And the example is, did birds come from reptiles? If that's the case, then at one point, what we know as a bird with feathers had scales. Well, if we follow this line, these millions of years, at some point it's going to start shedding its scales, but it's not got all of its feathers. It can't fly. It doesn't have its normal natural protection from predators, the scales. It can't fly. Look at the position it puts itself in as far as a predator that would want to come after it. Okay. Non-viability of transitional forms. And the last one is molecular isolation. Darwinists say that we all came from the same place because we all have DNA. Okay, we all have DNA. Science says that the DNA in an ape and the DNA in a man has similarities between 85 and 95%. Okay, is that evidence for a common ancestor, or is that evidence for a common creator, a common designer? I didn't bring it with me. If you could just imagine, okay, in one hand I've got a pot that you put on the stove and cook beans in, okay, and it's got a handle. In the other hand, I've got a teaspoon. In fact, in our drawer at home, we've got these little spoons. I don't know the different measurements, but they fit one inside the other. I bet some of you have the same thing. Okay. If I take the smallest of those little bitty measuring spoons up through the different measuring cups, up through small pans, all the way up to this great big Dutch oven or whatever, okay, does that say that this pot evolved from that teaspoon? No. Non-living, of course. What it does point to is a common creator or a common designer. Somebody came up with an idea for a small thing that holds something. with a handle, all the way over here to a big thing that holds something, a vessel. Okay, that's what I was trying to find. That holds something with a handle. Common creator. How about this? Those 4 letters of the genetic alphabet, what matters is the order that they are put in. That's just like it matters what order our 26 letters are put in. Does it not? Try this on. I'm going to use the exact same number of letters and give you 2 different sentences. Not just number, I'm going to use the exact same letters. All right? The first sentence is this: Charles Darwin was a scientific god. Same letters. And the order of the letters is way over 90% the same. Charles Darwin was a scientific dog. So you see the illustration? That the letters have to be in a certain order to get the message correct. When they're not in the same order, the message is completely different. Science says that the genetic similarity of a man and an ape is over 90%. You know what else? The genetic similarity of a man and a mouse is over 90%. What about the fossil record? Well, the evolutionists will tell us that the fossil record supports evolution or Darwinism. Well, we've got this evolutionist who is a paleontologist, studies bones at Harvard, named Stephen Jay Gould. Gould, I believe, is deceased now. He's an evolutionist, and he said this: fossils appear suddenly and they are fully formed, and they remain the same until that species is extinct. Well, if that's what he believes about fossils, that doesn't support Darwinism. So he came up with his own idea, kind of an addendum to evolution, if you will, called punctuated equilibria. Look that one up. It just means that a species has evolved faster. Instead of Darwin's, it's taken many years to get from the cell to the human, it's gone faster over a shorter period of time. He had to come up with something because he was an atheist. He couldn't say that there was an intelligent being that did this. You remember in one of our very first lessons, we said that many times beliefs are the product of what we find attractive, what we already believe, not based on proof. I got to think that Gould had already decided there wasn't such a thing as God, and now I've got to come up with something to support what I believe, even though what's already out there, I can't go with that. All right. There he is, Stephen Jay Gould. Is intelligent design an intelligent alternative? I know I don't pause very much, but you guys sure are quiet tonight. A lot covered in there. Intelligent design. When we look at the fossil record, we can come up with a reasonable conclusion. When we look at molecular isolation and transitional difficulties and irreducible complexity, cyclical change, genetic limits, all of those things, the conclusion that we can come up with is, yes, there have been changes, but they are on the micro level, not the macro level. If macroevolution is not true, then what is? Well, there's only 2 choices: natural or intelligent. There has to be an intelligent explanation. It's the only other option. But Darwinists don't like that idea. They've already decided they don't believe in God. There's not such a thing as an intelligent creator. So here are their objectives. Intelligent design is not science. Well, there's 2 types of causes: natural and, I should say, intelligent and non-intelligent, or natural. Okay, if intelligent design is not science, then guess what? Neither is Darwinism. Intelligent design commits the God of the gap fallacy. Now remember, this is the objection that the evolutionists have for intelligent design. Intelligent design commits the God of the gap fallacy. What does that mean? You know, there was a time, once upon a time, we didn't know anything about lightning, so we just said, God did it. We had a little gap in our knowledge to not understand that there was a natural cause for lightning. Darwinists say that believers in God do the same thing. They're just going to, instead of saying God's responsible for lightning, the theists just say God is responsible for the creation of life, for the creation of the world. Well, are they right when they say that we are doing the same thing, that we are attributing something to God because we don't have anything else to attribute it to? No. We have evidence for an intelligent cause. Intelligent design is open to both natural and intelligent causes. You just have to look at both. On the other hand, Darwinism is not. It is only open to the idea of natural causes. Okay. Are they correct in saying that we're just using God as our stopgap? No. Actually, the Darwinists are the ones using God of the gap fallacy. Go back to irreducible complexity. We have within us biological systems that are so complex as to sometimes, in some ways, be almost beyond our comprehension. And yet, they say natural selection, time, chance is what made that happen. What's another of their objections?
I'll jump in real quick.
Yes, please.
So this is one, what Richard just said. They're essentially making natural selection a deity unto itself. And this is something, even before I started studying this stuff years ago, that I really struggled trying to just wrap my head around, because we believe God caused everything to be. He created everything. Darwinists believe natural selection, evolution, whatever you want to call it, caused everything to be. What's the difference in those two beliefs? Really not a lot. So think about it. We started off as a single cell, supposedly. That single cell, over billions of years, whatever timeline, changed. What caused it to change? How did it know to change? How did it know what to change? How did it know to become a multi-celled living creature living in this pool, we'll say a fish, and then how did it decide, okay, I need to become a reptile and crawl out on land?
Well, if you're an atheist or an evolutionist, you say, well, we just got to give it millions and millions and millions of years. If we give it enough time, eventually it'll, become a Pop-Tart. You give it this sugar and this flour and this niacin and this artificial sweeteners and all this stuff, it'll eventually, boil around, but we don't ever see any evidence of that. So how can we have a reasonable faith in that evidence leads to that conclusion?
Right. And I mean, you have these cells, break it down to the smallest organism that you can think of. How does, let's say, the cells of a fin, how do those cells decide, okay, I need to become a leg, so I'm going to start somehow transforming myself into that leg. And it's not like it's the same cells that are doing it. Those actual cells die. And supposedly they pass on information to other cells. It gets really confusing, but to me that just never made sense. Because to me it sounds like the same argument we're making as far as a power is behind it, a power is causing it. So from what Richard was saying, they're making evolution or natural selection, or whatever you want to call it, a deity unto itself. That there's this guiding power giving information to these new organisms to change them and different things. And that's something I've always really struggled with, wrapping my mind around, of how they can accuse us of that when they're really saying the same exact thing in a different way. And in my opinion, there's a lot more absurd because it doesn't make sense.
They're just saying it's not God,
Right.
basically.
Right.
They're saying it's nature, that nature is what is deciding what lives and dies.
So nature is a god, essentially. is what they're saying. Mother Nature, as they call it, right? Yeah. Okay.
All right, another objection is that intelligent design is religiously motivated. Okay, does that make it wrong? No. The truth doesn't lie in the motivation, but it lies in the evidence. They say that the intelligent design people don't have any evidence. They're just saying what the Bible says. Now there's a good point. In fact, the ideas of intelligent design may in fact be consistent with what the Bible says, but they're not based on the Bible. They are based on evidence, not the scriptures. You may have noticed, this is our 6th class period. We've not been in the Bible. It's all been about science and philosophy. Well, I can assure you pretty soon we're going to be in the Bible, okay? We will be. Finally, intelligent design is false. Why? Because the design isn't perfect. Okay, one of the things they look at, Gould, the guy I mentioned earlier, he wrote a book called The Panda's Thumb. I don't know anything about pandas, but apparently their thumb doesn't work like ours. You know, we can do a whole lot of stuff because we have opposing thumbs. We can grasp and do this and that and everything else. Pandas don't. So because of that, intelligent design's false. Wait a minute. First, he has decided that the panda's thumb must be like man, because if it's not, it's not optimal. Well, it takes intelligence right there to decide if something is optimal or not. So that's one thing. But really, to decide if something is as good as it could be or it's less than optimal and suboptimal, you would have to know the designer's purpose, the designer's objective. What did the designer want for the panda's thumb? You know what? The panda has the perfect thumb and finger situation to be able to peel bamboo down to its edible part, which is what they eat. They have the perfect hardware to do that. The designer made them that way. And it's not because the design wasn't perfect. Well, I don't know if we're really actually ready for this question. In all the stuff that I've thrown out here tonight, why are there still people that believe this way? Real quick. First off, 2 quotes. Richard Dawkins. I don't know why both these quotes are guys named Richard. It is absolutely safe to say that if you meet somebody who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane. If you don't believe in evolution, this guy thinks you're ignorant, stupid, or insane. Richard Lewontin. Materialism is absolute. We cannot allow a divine foot in the door. I think his mind's already made up about whether there's a God or not. Okay, why did the Darwinists want to keep God out? If they allow God in, they are admitting they don't have the highest authority when it comes to truth. By allowing God in, they admit they don't have absolute authority when it comes to explaining causes. By allowing God in, they risk losing their financial security and the professional admiration that they enjoy from their peers. And finally, by allowing God in, they admit they don't have the authority to define right and wrong. I've been reading all this science stuff, and I get to the end, and I get to this part, and if this is the underlying factor, even if it's just for some of them and not of them, and by the way, every evolutionist doesn't believe everything I just said. There are some that absolutely believe the science supports what they believe. This is disturbing. Julian Huxley, he said that sexual freedom is a motivation behind evolutionary beliefs. Merv Griffin, remember the Merv Griffin show? Anybody remember? Anybody old enough to remember that? Okay. Ask him why people believed in evolution. You know what he said? The reason we accept Darwinism, even without proof, is because we don't want God to interfere with our sexual mores. If there's a God, there's right and wrong. Lee Strobel, who used to be an evolutionist, now a Christian who's written about 24 books about this stuff. I was more than happy to latch onto Darwinism as an excuse to jettison the idea of God so I could unabashedly pursue my own agenda in life without moral constraints. And finally, this quote, and I didn't write down who it was, in Darwinism, there is no more moral accountability. Well, as I said, not all Darwinists have these motivations. Some believe in the science and so on. I want to close with something that comes out of the book. There is a great debate in our country about whether we should be teaching evolution or creationism in the schools. Everybody's aware of it. What's wrong with teaching the things that we've just covered in the last 4 weeks? If they want to teach evolution, what's wrong with teaching these ideas that we have covered that, no, go ahead.
No, Richard, I was going to tell you, there's a guy named G.W. Hegel. You've heard the Hegelian dialectic. He wrote his ideas. His ideas fed into Darwin. Darwin read Hegel. You know who read Darwin? Adolf Hitler read Darwin. And it's all about some, the haves better than the have-nots. This race better than that race. If you look at Darwin, his philosophies, they all line up, and they go back to Hegel, that some race is better than another race. Or, and that's kind of their thinking and their philosophies when you study the history of it.
Thank you. Good point. Again, why don't we teach this in our schools? Teach evolution? Okay, but teach the other side of it as well. Our writers say this. Notice we haven't been quoting Bible verses to make our points, and I said that just a minute ago. That's right, we haven't. What has been cited is scientific evidence. It's not a battle of science versus religion. It's a battle between good science and bad science. Right now, most of our children are being taught bad science because they're only being taught evolution.
It comes down to your last point there. In a school setting, if we're defining what's right or wrong from creation or evolution, there's a debate on whether or not schools should be taking that moral ground. And I think, unfortunately, the side of not pushing the moral ground is kind of winning in the public sector at this point.
And the question we need to ask is, how can you define right and wrong if you don't know where your standard of good is?
They don't want to define right and wrong.
If you don't have a standard of good, which is God, then how do you define right and wrong?
All right, next week.
Get ready, because we're switching gears straight into morality and all about Christianity from here on out.
Peter?
2 seconds. How we've just finished about our kids and stuff, that's one of my main motivations for kind of doing this. Who just totally stressed out about this stuff for our kids? You think, okay, our kids are going to, well, there's a public school, private school. I went through 2 private college universities, Christian universities, and both of them taught evolution. It's garbage. So one place you can start, something that I highly recommend, I talked about College Express last week. They've got publications. This one's called Discovery. It's for upper elementary. Really good stuff. You'll learn stuff from it too, I promise. It's really fascinating. Our girls love it. We go through it with them. Talks about design, talks about just everything that'll help them get their little brains working in the right direction, so that whenever they start to hear these things in school, they already have a good solid foundation to be able to fight it back. If you want to look at them, please do. I highly recommend them. It's $13 for a full year subscription. Nothing. Take a look.
Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.